So it was 1984, and a really good friend of mine had been working at this place called Apple that I had read a whole lot about in Newsweek and thought it was a really exciting company, and he was there. I was living in Cambridge at the time. I was born in Cambridge. I spent all my time in Cambridge. He invited me out for a weekend to visit him at Apple, and I took advantage of it, and could not, having come from the nonprofit sector, could not believe that there was a culture of people who were doing what those maniacs at Apple were doing. I mean, these were people who looked like they worked harder than we did in the nonprofit sector, which was a pretty high bar. And I came away from there with a feeling of both a little bit of craziness and a little bit of there's something going on here. I returned to Cambridge and immediately got a job offer from the Apple, what was then called the Apple Education Foundation, and they said, why don't you come back to Apple, we'll give you this job. I didn't know, I never really wanted to leave Cambridge, my roots went very deep there, but I knew at the time that I would kick myself if I didn't at least take advantage of the opportunity. So I went back to Apple. I'd never sold my little house in Cambridge because I doubted really that this was going to work. And I'd probably be returning to Cambridge again, and for the rest of my life. I went out there. I began to work for the Apple Education Foundation. After about 6 months, I frankly wasn't crazy about how they were doing philanthropy at the time, for reasons I won't go into, but it just didn't feel quite right to me. So I decided I was going to leave. It was a nice try, and I would just kind of go back where I came from. But then there was an interesting sort of point in time at Apple where Apple was distinguishing itself, particularly from IBM, by saying they're about corporations and big business, we're about individuals. Mm-hmm. And I heard that a lot, and I began to look around and see who we were talking to, and there were no disabled individuals in that world, Apple's worldview. It wasn't that they were resistant to it, it's just that, like many people, they just weren't thinking about people with disabilities. And that's when I decided, well, before I return back to Cambridge and call this a failed experiment, I'm going to write a little proposal to Apple that says, here's why you should be interested in people with disabilities. The proposal, as I recall, was about 4 pages long. It had no ROI, it had no finance information in it at all. Nor was it philanthropic. That was the other key point. It was not to say we need to do more charity with people with disabilities. It simply said if we're about individuals, we need to be about all individuals. And weirdly enough, I think it was within a week, I got an approval on this 4-page proposal, which I really wish I could find somewhere. And they said, go ahead and make this happen. See if you can make this happen. So I was delighted because now I didn't have to think about leaving, and I was really, really happy, and then I was scared to death. It's a little bit like when in the nonprofits you work really hard to get a proposal, and if you get it funded, then you go, oh my God, now I got to do this thing. It was fun to write it, but now I have to go do it. And so, but one of the things that helped me probably more than anything else at that very early stage was John Scully calling me up the day after the proposal was approved. And he called me into his office and he said, look, we've never done this before. I don't know if you can do it. I'm not sure we can make it happen, but you have to make me one promise. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, you have to promise me that if this fails, it will fail huge. And I remember thinking, it was like the best business lesson I ever got, because he was saying that, what he was saying was just go for it. If you're going to do it Apple-like, and make it happen right. And if you fail, that's fine, but don't fail because you were just nibbling around the edges. Fail because something needed to be done and Apple wants to do it. Mm-hmm. And to this day, that's the best business lesson I've told John this on several occasions since then. And he remembers that little meeting, I remember that little meeting, and it was a real turning point in what then became our operation to begin the disability group.